Sometimes it's just one single photograph that can pull you into a really dark corner of history. It forces you to ask these questions you would have never even thought of. And that's exactly what happened here. This whole explainer, it all started with one truly haunting image. This is Mikhail Shamonin. His friends probably called him Misha. In 1937, he was arrested by the Soviet state. He was sentenced, and then he was executed at the Butovo shooting range. Those are just the facts, as stark and as brutal as they are. But just look at his face. He's just a boy, a kid. And that leads to this huge, unavoidable question that we're going to try to unpack today. How on earth did this happen? How does an entire state apparatus get to the point where it executes a child? Okay, so to really get Misha's story, we can't just look at him in isolation. We've got to understand the world he was born into. It's like we need to pull the camera back, Zoom out from this one boy and look at the massive social crisis that set the stage for this whole tragedy. 7 million. Just let that number sink in for a second. 7 million. That's how many homeless kids were estimated to be in Russia back in 1922, right after the Civil War. They had a name for them, the Besprizorniki. We're talking about an entire generation of children who were orphaned, abandoned, just left to survive on the streets however they could. Now, this is absolutely crucial to understanding what happened next. It all comes down to a shift in how the state saw these kids. In the early 1920s, they were seen as innocent victims, tragic casualties of war and revolution. But fast forward to the end of the decade, and that compassion, it's gone. Completely. Suddenly, they're not victims anymore. They're a threat, a public menace that had to be dealt with. So when you change how you see a problem, you change how you deal with it, right? That shift in perception led directly to a major shift in policy. The state started creating, legal weapons, really, tools it could use to crack down on this so-called threat. It was basically an iron fist designed to criminalize childhood itself. One of the first big pieces of this was something called the 3 Years of Wheat Law from 1932. Now, you have to remember, this was during a horrific, widespread famine. People were starving, and this law made it a serious crime for anyone, to pick up even a few leftover grains of wheat from a field after the harvest. Think about that. A desperate attempt to find a scrap of food was suddenly an act of sabotage against the entire Soviet state. And then, in 1935, the final piece of the puzzle, or maybe the final piece of the trap, snapped into place. A new decree came out that lowered the age of criminal responsibility all the way down to 12 years old. This meant that from that point on, children could face every single criminal penalty on the books, right up to and including execution, just like an adult. Okay. So with all of that chilling context in mind, let's go back to Misha. Let's go back to the boy in that photograph. Because now we can start to see the system that was basically just waiting for him. And we can also see just how much mystery still surrounds his particular case. The thing is, the details are incredibly sketchy, and that's really part of the story itself. The allegation against him was that he stole 2 loaves of bread. His age, it's listed differently in different places, maybe 13, maybe 15. And his actual case files, they're completely sealed, inaccessible to the public. We don't even know for sure what specific law they used to convict him. The very system that took his life made sure to bury his story. But the few fragments we do have, they offer some really disturbing clues. For instance, there's a note in his file, just a casual mention, that says the child was credited as 2 years older. Now, let's be clear, this wasn't just some sloppy paperwork. No way. This was a deliberate lie, a manipulation to make executing a child look a little more acceptable on paper. So you're probably wondering, okay, if all the files are locked away, how do we know any of this stuff? And that's a great question. The answer is actually a huge part of this story. It's all because of a very brief moment when we got a glimpse into this hidden past. The timeline is pretty incredible when you lay it out. Misha is executed in 1937. For the next 50-plus years, his story, his very existence is basically erased. Then, in the 1990s, the Soviet Union collapses, and for a short period, the state archives are cracked open. It created this tiny window of opportunity, and researchers literally raced against the clock, copying as many documents and photos as they could. They saved stories like Misha's right before those doors slammed shut again. And what they found in those archives was just horrifying. Misha's story is so tragic because he was so young. He's the youngest person we know of who was executed at the Butovo camp. But what's so important to understand is that he wasn't some kind of one-off, a terrible mistake. He was not the only child this happened to.
69. That's how many minors, children, were executed at just that one camp, at Butovo alone. So yeah, Misha was the youngest. But his story, it really stands for dozens of others. It takes his personal tragedy and puts it into the context of what it really was, a systematic policy of terror.
And that really brings us to a final, pretty chilling thought, because today, those archives are sealed again. The stories are incomplete. We don't know the faces of the other 68 children. And it leaves us with this fundamental question, right? What is lost when a history is locked away? What happens to our sense of justice, our collective memory, our grasp on the truth when the files are kept under lock and key?